Welcome to MOTS, where we'll be applying the Manzer or Mosley Thurlow scale of quantitative analysis of pop culture narrative through a binary system.
Or MOTS! This podcast contains spoilers, mature content, and language. Viewer discretion advised. Hello and welcome to MOTS. I'm Jonathan Ian Manzer, here with Scott Thurlow.
Hello.
So, tonight we decided to play, in a sense, double roulette with a movie. We first did a random genre, which turned out to be science fiction, specifically robots, androids, and cyborgs. And then we went on Netflix and picked 5 movies within the science fiction thing that matched that. And we ended up also choosing Left Behind because Nic Cage is a machine when it comes to coming out with movies. So that turned out to be the choice we were left with. So, Scott, would you like to give a little synopsis of Left Behind?
Yes. I would say it's something like adulterous pilot gets cock-blocked by the Rapture on his birthday.
I could think of no greater tragedy than that.
Yes.
So I'm going to begin with MOTS tonight and speak on the introduction. Now, this is an interesting movie because I want to give a little background to myself before we really delve into this.
Okay.
I'm an atheist for all intents and purposes, and I went in thinking I would hate this movie. And in the introduction, I'm kind of torn because they do a good job of characterizing a lot of the main characters right away. Most of the supporting cast is given a one-dimensional, but it's subverted later on.
We'll talk about that later, but go on.
But to the point of, does it work as a narrative to begin with? Am I introduced to the characters, who they are, what their issues are? And do I actually felt myself rooting for these characters. Regardless, that was the intent of the movie. But I actually felt sympathetic to a lot of these characters, especially knowing what this movie was about. So, oddly enough, I think I had to give this a 1, just because it was a lot more two-dimensional characters than I thought they would be, specifically the main characters.
All right.
And more to that point, the female protagonist, whose name Chloe is, who I thought was characterized very well. So again, I'm surprised by this myself. I would never think going into this movie I would give this any positive review. I have to give this a 1. Scott?
Well, the Lord works in mysterious ways, as you well know, so maybe that's why you're giving it a 1. I'm going to take this question more literally as I usually do. What we usually say about it is, does it have an arresting introduction? Does it grab me? While I agree that they were, yes, characterized enough, that doesn't mean it grabbed me. So, yeah, here are these characters, and here are their daily lives, and here's their relationships to each other, but I did not give a shit. There was nothing to care about surrounding them. So I'm going to give it... Quick background as well. I also am not a fan of religion and Christianity, specifically. But so that, of course, is going to inform a number of my opinions about this movie, given its nature and its material. But regardless, narratively, yes, sure. They were, well built up characters, but I still didn't care about them. I wasn't invested in what was their story, what was happening. So I'm going to give it a 0.
May I counter that point for a second? Again, we're going to go into this more with the themes, but I didn't know that this was a Christian movie. The way they developed the characters were that all of them were very sympathetic for being anti-religious. And I guess going in with if I had gone to this movie blind, not knowing that this was about the Rapture and would eventually have kind of, maybe not heavy-handed religious commentary, but with the purpose of...
The obvious intent of such, yes.
I don't know, I guess I was intrigued by where they were going with this. And is that fair? Should I draw outside context into this? But again, that's where I'm coming from.
I get it. That's a question we've raised a number of times when trying to apply our system. It's fair to an extent, I would say. It's just that, again, to answer the actual opening question, the opening of this movie was not just boring, middle of the road at best to me. I wasn't invested.
I was, again, maybe my bar was set so low I was expecting at best a Lifetime original series
and
from
almost
the 90s.
Was that at times, but all right.
But since it was even above that, I was willing to give it the benefit of the doubt. So we'll move on to the next question. Scott, was this movie totally consistent throughout?
Well, I'm probably going to lean towards giving it a 1. I think it somewhat is. But more often than not, again, like when we're divided about a question like this one specifically, if you think to yourself that more often than not if the ratio was like, 60-40 or 70-30, which I think is somewhere about right for this movie, I think it was. So therefore, yeah, like it had like weird switches, but the tone itself overall didn't really, I don't think. And I'll explain more why, I think, as we flow into the next question. But to answer this one on the surface, you'll have to mark me as a 1.
I thoroughly enjoyed this movie the entire time I watched it. Mm-hmm. I was never bored during any scene. But I don't know if this... Like, I was laughing at points throughout this movie that I perhaps shouldn't have been
probably
laughing
not
at.
intended as laughing parts, yes.
One of the
comedic parts.
I guess I wish I could talk to the screenwriter and the director and get where they were.
Let's call them up, get them on the horn.
Yeah, I feel almost that a religious person wrote the script, but they got someone who wasn't religious to direct.
No, they got a Hollywood guy. He'd be like, "Listen, all right, here's how we're really gonna make this movie." I get that sense out of it too.
Like there were when the actual rapture happens, like chaos breaks out immediately.
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna say. That I'll speak about that too. But yeah, it was weird. But
so there's two scenes in this that she like one of the main character Chloe is walking along trying to get back home and carrying her purse, and some guys on a moped just speed by and grab her purse.
It was her brother's book bag, not even her purse. That was like what was left of her brother when he was raptured away.
And that I guess that was meant to be tragic. But it came off as and then a school bus later just drives off the road and falls into a crevice. Yeah. And again, if I'm laughing at scenes that were intended to be serious, can I claim that for tonal consistency there? And I don't know if I can. And as much as I thoroughly enjoyed a lot, I think if you're trying to go for serious and it doesn't, is that capturing the tone you want it to be? Unless you're failing the entire time, and then I guess you are totally consistent.
That's somewhat I'm going to say, but go on. You got anything more to add?
So I'm going to have to go with 0.
Okay, fair enough.
Just because I was laughing inappropriately the entire time.
And see, that's fair. So that's why many things we're probably going to say, because of the nature of this movie and the nature of ourselves. Are we judging it on a fair... I like to think I'm trying to judge it as objectively, narratively as possible. Yes, they meant those to be serious. And, like, everything in the movie was meant to be serious. Because you and I are who we are, we found it comedic at times. But that doesn't mean that they obviously didn't mean it as such. And, taken at face value, it's obvious the tone they were going for. They did not... You're a fan of saying if the movie plays by its own rules. It pretty much did, broadly. So... that's what I'm giving. Again, objectively, narratively, that's why I gave it a 1.
That's fair. Now this is we're going to themes now.
We're going to flow into this. Yes, I'm ready for it.
I think this is the most fascinating part about this movie because when you think of Left Behind, it's a book series about a pro-Christian rapture series.
It's rapture propaganda, more or less.
And this movie, again, I came in with a lot of preconceptions of what this would be about. And I was surprised at every turn. Because they didn't, in a sense, demonize any of the people who were left
Not
behind.
To the extent you thought they were going to be.
Yeah, but even to that point.
Perhaps.
Every character had their flaw, but you could see, it was kind of divided between, again, I think that anyone watching this movie will take the theme they want out of it. I viewed it as a lot of cool people that I think I would get along with really well were left behind on the world by a callous and heartless God.
The whims of an arbitrary God.
But not only did I take that interpretation, other characters had that interpretation of Chloe herself.
It says more or less
constantly monologues about how God doesn't care. and that this is just a like they kind of have her find religion at the end, but it's never as strong as her anti-religious sentiments that
it's
are
not offset by that. Yes.
expanded earlier. So again, there's one of the great characters in here is a Muslim guy who is he's genuinely described like throughout the
he's characterized as a well-meaning and well-intentioned person who tries to do good and help people,
and is a man of faith as well. But because he's the wrong religion,
by default.
Again, so is this supposed to be a appeal to fundamentalists who want to believe that only those who have faith? They have a priest who says, "Oh, I said all the words, but I never truly believed it," and by all accounts, he was a good man as well, and had worked as a shepherd to his flock.
Tried to, at least, yes.
So is this appealing to the fundamentalists, or this is appealing to atheists who they're pointing out all the atheist views on the faults of religion? So was that intended? Was this subversion amongst this? It's
when it gets to.
So I'm fascinated by this movie, and I think you could have good debates after this movie on the intention of not only what this movie meant to say, but the greater concept of religion as a whole. So I'm gonna have to give it a 1 for that, because just how kind of fascinating it was in what themes I think it was trying to say. And so, Scott,
that's all completely fair, and I'm broadly see where you're coming from, and mostly in line with it. It's just that it's, again, a grayer area to question to answer, because the themes we get out of it are the themes that it actually intended it to have. Because ostensibly on the surface, it should contain the theme of Christians are right and everyone else is wrong, and so therefore they get rewarded. Right? Like that, ostensibly, that's what it should have. But
it subverted it quite a bit.
But it doesn't really have. Yeah, like as you said, it portrays those people who are left behind as broadly, yes, they're characters, but they're not all completely negative. Like, they have some depth, a minor bit of depth to them.
In fact, I would say that, again, taking apart the fact that the world devolves into chaos immediately upon religious people leaving, every named character, every person you spend time with, is generally shown to be a real person.
Yes.
To have flaws, but have benefits to the characters as well.
I agree with that.
So, that's why I would love to interview the people who made this to see what their actual views align.
I agree. That's what I'm trying to get at, more or less. That what themes did they want it to have versus how it came off. Really, like, it was a bit odd. If you're trying to go for fundamentalist, hardcore, hardline, Christianity is right, then it didn't quite do that. But was that the intent at all? At the end of the day, we'll never know. I guess we won't know until we talk to them. But was it effective? I think somewhat, yes, in portraying it straddled the line pretty well. I think it could have gone. It could have been a lot more, as we said, ham-fisted than you thought it would be. Yeah. It was a lot more nuanced, even though it wasn't as nuanced as it could have been were it not the nature of the message of this film.
My bias is going to come through here, but I could see the self-righteous religious people feeling very smug at, oh, look, we were right all along. Them feeling a satisfaction out of seeing this movie.
Yes, maybe, but
that's the thing. So we're so far on the other side that I think that it can appeal to both ends.
Who knows what
that's
they get out of it.
That's an effective movie. Or if you're bringing up a political, religious dialogue, being able to appeal to both ends, I think
it's somewhat effective. It deserves a 1, I guess, if you're doing that. If you can do that. And I guess more or less I agree, and you convinced me perhaps beyond what I was going to say anyways. So you can mark me as a 1 for that. We can sort of talk about this. We shouldn't. Let's move on soon. But just to be clear, it's very interesting to think about what the themes, intents, etc. were, what they truly wanted to impart in this film, and what various audiences, again, because of bias and mindsets, will get out of it.
All right, Scott. The end. Not just God's end. The end of this movie. What are your thoughts?
Hey, man, the end is here. No, near. No, here. I mean, not even, I don't want to say reluctantly, I just think narratively it's going to get a 1. I think it did achieve its goal by the end. If the goal was to say the rapture is going to occur and is right, and the last line I think is something like, oh, it looks, the one love interest-ish male hero, if you will, if you can call it that, of the film, says something like, it's like the end of the world. This is like the end, as you just said. And Chloe, the female lead, says, no, this is just the beginning. And like I believe it's the last line in the film, is it not?
I believe so.
I think so.
We just saw it 10 minutes ago.
So if that was their goal and
sequel bit
by the end, sequel bit, yeah, you said it to me. I was over like, so what next? The Antichrist? I'm like, well, it's over. Regardless, having said all that, however facetiously I may have just said it, I still think, indeed, if we're applying our system, then I'll have to give it a 1. It achieved its goal by the end of portraying the rapture.
I'm trying to do this more narratively. Now, we beyond just themes, because, again, we said that at the end, overall, you could see it as either way, really.
Depending who you are. Yeah.
What were the character arcs involved with this? So, Nicolas Cage is one of the main characters. And he's an adulterous pilot who, when he realizes that the rapture happens, he sort of realizes that his Christian wife
super
was
religious
correct.
wife was right about it all. Yes.
So he starts to go into that religious mode a little bit. But then at the very end, he's sort of flirting with his stewardess who's having an affair with.
The one he wanted to sleep with anyway.
So does he evolve as a character from point A to point B?
Well, he's sine waves, kind of.
The daughter supposedly finds religion, but in the end finds herself in the arms of
it's left somewhat open, yes.
Again, I don't know how many of these characters learned anything throughout this movie, if any, aside from the fact that they're in a post-apocalyptic
But it's all moot.
world.
I was going to say that, yeah.
Like,
whatever they
learned,
change? The rapture is still occurring.
Exactly. So, I don't know if I can give this a 1.
I get what you're saying, sure.
Because I don't know if this movie had any purpose beyond just being an action movie that's set in the rapture. Mm-hmm. And
which
a
also be a good
mediocre action movie at that.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm going to give this a 0.
All right.
And also...
I was going to say, like, the thing is... Go ahead.
The ending... If this is an action movie, we're reviewing on that, it's Airplane.
Is it?
It's Passenger 47 or whatever that is. It's
should,
snakes on a plane.
You should have talked. It's Rapture on a plane.
Yes. It's a Die Hard 2, whatever, with the planes. This was a pretty mediocre action ending. So, I don't know. While I enjoyed the movie, I didn't feel it was a satisfying ending.
All right. Fair enough. And that's where subjective, this comes in here with our system. Sure. And... I'll just touch back on this real quickly because I don't want to keep harping on it and go back to it. But we've sort of glossed over what genre is it. Is it indeed just a piece of rapture fundamentalism, mouthpiece for it? Or is it an action movie? Or is that wrapped into an action movie? Like, ostensibly an action movie, but there's not all that much action to it, technically.
But it is, because...
Yes, there's tension, I suppose. Yeah.
It's structured like an action movie.
That's true. That's fair. All right. Given that, so I'll have to agree. Sure. Let's go on.
Okay. So the antagonist, and now my bias is really going to come in.
I know what you're going to say, and I'm going to say it too.
And I'm saying this from the point of view of believing that this movie was less about being pro-Christian and more being anti-Christian. God is the antagonist.
Of course, that's what I'm going to fucking say too. Yeah. Go on. It's obvious though to us, but let's talk about it.
As I mentioned before, a number of atheist characters give speeches about the callousness of God. They talk about, in a sense, the tsunamis
and the arbitrariness.
There's one of the characters is a investigative reporter who was, I believe, doing the 2004 tsunami.
I think his name is Cameron. An XP4. They just mentioned a tsunami, so it's like an XP for like recent disasters.
Yeah. And he and Chloe have a discussion about how. Like the callous, like how can you believe when you're like there's such destruction in the world
happening all around? Yes.
And then they're proven right by having God take these select group up and causing planes full of otherwise maybe flawed individuals, but not deserving to die in a horrible plane crash, or so I don't know. It seems like their point of this movie is that God is wrathful and callous and will destroy the world, and you're rooting for these otherwise sinners, if you're going for the Christian end, to survive what a predicament God put them in. So I have to give. How can you root against an evil God? So for how can you give a 0 to an evil God? So I have to give it a 1 for that.
Yes, of course. I mean, that's what I'm going to say more or less. Again, it's a facetious point on the surface, but I still think it stands. And it's almost like it's so bizarre because of that. Like, yeah, the first monologue that Chloe has is in the airport, speaking out like a Jesus freak, if you will, comes up and starts spouting about the disaster and why God has a plan, blah blah blah. And then Chloe just comes up and like spits bile back in her face about how God doesn't give a shit. But here's the thing, right? Again, because of the nature of this, the other, like, if there was someone else who was a protagonist, who was supposed to be a protagonist, but who was good enough to be raptured, then they're gone from the film. So by default, you're left with those who are not deserving, quote unquote, unworthy, the unworthy. They're the ones who are left as your protagonists. Like, it's a bizarre way to do it, because if you're subscribed to this philosophy, then you'll be left with no protagonists at all.
And what's interesting is that each of these characters, like, none of the religious characters, I felt, really put up an interesting defense for why God should exist.
Just that he does.
Every other character who's an atheist, who's like a political mindset, puts up a kind of rational, reasons I would give for if I were in a debate about religion.
Sure.
And the movie just says, "Oh, religion is right, and these people are wrong."
That's the whole point of religion. Like, that's what religion, especially. Don't worry about it. Here's the answers. Oh, you have questions about them? It doesn't matter. This is the correct answer. So let me just sort of.
But because they're characterized so well on the enemy is characterized
on the other
so
end, yes. Yeah.
So even if these atheists are the enemy, they're very well characterized. So I have to give them a 1 as well.
That's fair enough. Yeah. So I sort of glossed over a bit, but I mean, yeah. Broadly, I'm going to agree. Like, if not God, in quotes, then religion itself is the antagonist of humanity. Always. That's my bias. That's what I'm always going to say about it. And yes, it has to get a 1 because it's one of the hardest enemies to fight against.
Mm. So, on the opposite end, who's the protagonist? God?
No, of course, no. It's going to be it's an ensemble, a small ensemble piece, I would say. It's going to be Captain Steele, I believe, is Nic Cage's character's name. It's going to be the reporter Cameron, I think. But his name was Cameron, but he's like, call me Buck or Bucky or some shit like that, something like that. And then Chloe, obviously. So like the trifecta, and then everyone else pretty much a supporting character. So I'm going to give them a 1. They were pretty effective, if not memorable. They were appropriate for sure. Like, they represented who they needed to represent, if you will. Oh shit! I just thought of this. There's 3 of them. They're like the Antichrist to the Holy Trinity, if you will. You get three separate entities, but basically represent one same entity in a whole, just the opposite of what the Holy Trinity is.
I think you're looking more into this than they were when they created it.
Of course, but that's somewhat of a joke on top of that. But no, regardless, I mean, they certainly were the 3 protagonists, and they were like certainly more better characterized as it went on than everyone else. That's almost going to be the case by default. But the characterizations they did have, I think, like as you were saying earlier, they mostly, more or less, had most of an arc, if not fully, if not like going over the complete edge or like finalizing it at the end. They did indeed learn something, or at least grew closer to each other because of the rapture, if you will. So rapture brings families together. It would also be a message and a theme synopsis of this movie. But regardless, like I like them well enough, and they were well done, both, again, broadly, dialogue and their actors were fine, so they did a good enough job with it that warrants a 1 for me. That's basically all I could say.
I will agree quite a bit on your point. While they weren't, I mentioned earlier that I felt that the character arcs weren't really there. The initial development was there, and they're all like you have Cameron, who or Justin Timberlake, or whoever you want. He's voyeuristic, but he's also heroic.
Well, he's this caricature, investigative journalist guy.
Yeah, but at one point, there's
he plays the heroic part. I agree with that.
There's a woman going mad because her son disappeared from the rapture. So she ends up getting a gun from one raptured air marshal, pointing, and he tells, "Point the gun at me." Instead of
sure.
He has those heroic moments to him, but he also has that kind of like disinterested voyeuristic nature of being an investigative journalist.
Yes.
Although I don't know if he's ever described with the sins. You ever understand what his real sins are that led him to not be raptured? But I guess
not
that's
believing, of course. That's broadly what I would say. He does outright admit that, more or less.
Yes. You have the Chloe, who's a straight atheist, and again, almost unfairly, because her atheism comes from the fact that her parents are like kind of getting divorced, and she's in college, and that tends to broaden the mind. So, and then you have the father, who's Nic Cage, who's atheistic, but again, he's heroic, and then actually they all have their moments for that. So, because they're two-dimensional, I have to give them a 1. I thought that they did a much better job with the protagonists than I ever thought they would.
Right.
So, we're on to supporting characters now, and I have to give this a 1. But I just want to give a caveat first. There are some obnoxious supporting characters. Specifically, Russell, was it? Her younger brother?
Raimi or something.
Raymond
or something.
Who was the most obnoxious child actor I've seen in a very long time. With the worst dialogue given to him, too. But the supporting characters were fantastic. I'm gonna leave one to you, Scott.
Yes,
that I think you're going to go. But I'm going to go with the Muslim guy.
All right.
Who
That's
is... It's a very tragic portrayal, because, again, they didn't...
He's as noble as can be.
Yeah, he is absolutely fantastic. He's always he's always willing to help out other passengers. He's
trying to calm them down. He's trying to reassure them.
And he's a man of faith. But, again, they didn't go the easy route of what they could have with that character.
Right. He was never a mustache-trolling side villain, even at all. Yeah,
he was one of the more heroic characters.
Sure.
And for that, in a Christian film, I have to give that all the props.
Much respect.
Though it is religious that they.
It's implicitly that he left them behind, of course.
Yeah, because it doesn't matter how faithful and how good a person. If you're not the right faith, you're being left behind.
I mean, if that's the core philosophy, then again, that's why I gave it tonal consistency, because yes, it's more nuanced. Again, they're showing this is a good guy. But because his faith disagrees with ours, and our faith decrees this, then, sorry. Shit out of luck, my friend.
And there's also one thing, that if we're going by the traditional sins of Christianity, as outlined by Dante in his Divine Comedies, they have this character who's, eating a candy bar, and he's obviously a glutton, and he gets raptured.
Yeah, so, it's implied to be.
So obviously, this movie denies Dante.
They keep it even grayer than that, or just go off their own tangent or whatever.
But anyway, Scott, onto you.
I'm going to give it a 1 in the grand tradition of you. I'm going to give it a 1 because of, I don't mean to be insulting about this, but Midget Man. They never said his fucking name. There's a midget on the plane, and first of all, he's a gambler. That's set up pretty early on. And he's sort of abusive. He's berating people. He's hostile to most people. He's always like, "Come on, what are you talking about?" He's trying to put his he gets up to put his luggage in the storage compartment overhead, and the Arab guy, Muslim guy, gets up to help him. He's like, "Did I ask you for help?" He's like, "I'm just trying to just trying to help you out, my friend. You don't what do you want?" He's like, "Go back." And then he looks over at the little girl sitting next to me. He's like, "What are you looking at?" He's just abrasive to everybody for no reason. And every time, even after the quote event happens, they never outright say that until very end. That it's the rapture, and people are throwing out various theories and so forth. And he's like, "You believe that bullshit?" No matter what someone says, he's like, "It's stupid."
But he's also, when someone, the Muslim guy actually says that, what if everyone just turned invisible?
Yeah.
He's out testing to see if...
That's true.
So
that's true. That's true. the funny little moment that they had in there. But regardless, like as we said sort of earlier, they were fleshed out more than you expected, and the way they were fleshed out, I think, did humanize them way more than, of course, could have been, and it made for an interesting sort of dynamic of characters. Like I also like the old, ostensibly again on the surface, they're supposed to represent like something immoral or something that is going wrong, and explaining why the rapture is happening now. So there's the old Texan business guy who's on the phone.
Oh yeah, he was great as well.
And then he gives a speech.
JR.
Yeah. Well, I call him JR. He gives a speech about how he was never there for his daughter. He recognizes a daughter of his an old business associate of his, and says like, "Oh, well, you were growing up, I remember your daddy. He had a little plastic desk just for you in his office too." He's like, "I wish I had that for my daughter." He was like confessing his sins to her, and she was also, and on top of that, she was a drugged out like a addict. She had a coke on the plane, and she had track marks.
She had heroin, I think.
Right. Okay. Well, either way, she was doing drugs on the plane, and clearly was.
And having a bad
trip. Yeah, exactly. This ain't happening. So given all that, like, of course, as I said, the one that amused me the most was I'll just call him Midget Man. No one ever said his name. He never said his name. But he was well done, and I was happy every time he was on screen. So that's why.
Scott didn't mention this, and this might be more of an immersion-breaking moment, but there's this point at the end of the movie where they land the plane safely, spoiler alert.
Yes.
And everyone's going to drop down the
they have the emergency
slide.
Landing thing, engaged.
And I believe it's the Muslim guy. I might be wrong about that, but someone kicks the midget down the slide.
He gets pushed down the slide in a comedic way.
Which is completely inappropriate.
And callous as hell.
Yes.
Yes.
So, you know what? I'm going back and reaffirming my tonal consistency, because that's completely out of character for what this movie should be. Which kind of makes me think this was meant to be a comedy.
Maybe like the Hollywood suits subverted it. Like, the Left Behind guy thought, he's like, all right, finally I'm getting my movie, my agenda pushed forth. He's like, all right, yeah, we'll use your shit to make a movie, but, we're the Hollywood guys. We know what really should be done with this.
All right, Scott, dialogue. Go.
All right, this is one that I'm the most torn about. Was it memorable? Kind of. But for the reason that it wanted to be? Not quite. I don't know. Nevertheless, okay. I'll keep it condensed because I'm going to give it a 1, and here's why. More often than not, I found it to be engaging, even if it wasn't meant to be, even if it was definitely stilted as hell for a lot of the exchanges, but that somehow made it awesome. It's almost like the so good it's bad thing.
What, the baseball glove that I was asking for?
Yeah, it was fucking like Beaver Cleaver thing. Yeah, so Chloe comes back to her house and gives a gift for her little brother, which is a baseball glove, and he goes, "It's like it's fucking A Christmas Story. My Red Ryder BB gun. This is the baseball glove that I asked for. Thank you, sister, that I love so much." It was so stilted, but somehow like it endeared itself to me in a way. So for that reason, and it got again, it was serviceable enough broadly overall for the most part, and as it went on, it got okay. And even if you thought it was like Lifetime-y-ish, which it certainly was, it somehow was amusing nonetheless. So does it deserve it to be? Maybe not, but I'm good. This subjective my part comes into this aspect of it. I'm giving it a 1 dialogue-wise. And did we mention the sign thing? I did, I believe.
Yeah, you briefly mentioned it.
All right, so just to recap, there was the old classic homeless guy, or somebody had a sign that said, "The end is near," and then when the rapture happened, seconds later, apparently, when society goes mad, which is actually excellent as well. I count that as dialogue almost. Or tonal consistency, maybe. But either way, it said, instead of near, it crossed out and just said here. And it was just the sign, sitting by itself on the street, on the curb. So that was a good moment. So that's all I have to say about that.
I'm very torn on how to score this. We don't really talk about soundtracks at all. Sometimes we add it to dialogue.
I think you can count it as that.
But this is one of the worst soundtracks I've ever heard any movie.
It was weird.
At the end of the movie, during the entire scene of whether this plane will land or not, like when Chloe is attempting to do this absurd thing, clean out the abandoned highway so the plane can land, it's a theme that is most appropriate for the 1960s Batman. Like, I kept thinking that he would appear in that and bam, zoom to villains.
Yes.
But did I cringe at any point during this movie? No. And did I find some of... Again, I felt that they actually characterized...
They were fleshed out.
atheistic viewpoints very well. And I thought, like, there's one scene where, again, it's all a little bit stilted. It's not. Some of it is very, very stilted, but most of it's serviceable.
Yes.
And
it gets by, I guess.
There's a where Chloe goes into a church, her mother's church, and the pastor's still there, and they have a discussion where he's trying to like console, and she goes like, "Why would I even listen to you? You're still here.
You didn't listen to you.
Yeah, you didn't listen.
I believe is the exact line.
So, because it actually, I'm giving it a 1 in context of this movie for what I expected this to be and what it turned out. So, if this were a different movie, if it was a different genre, perhaps it would deserve a 0. But
because of the
I'm
nature
giving it
of
the
it,
benefit of the doubt because it was surprising.
Fair enough.
All right, and I'm on to immersion now.
Yes,
I have to give this a 0 because I was laughing hysterically the entire time. Well, not the entire time, but the majority of the movie.
90% of the time, I would say.
I was surprisingly in. It's a long movie. It's near 2 hours.
Just under 2. Yeah.
I was engaged. You know, they actually paced it pretty well.
I would agree with that.
They had, like, for instance, towards the end when I was like, how are they going to entertain me for another 40 minutes? Like, a woman pulls out a gun, like, freaking out, and that was a tense scene, and I thought it was well done and kept the movie
narrative
going.
Sense, more or less. Yeah.
Was it necessary?
No.
No, but again, it kept me engaged. But from the very fact that I was, like, Scott and I were laughing and joking and making, like, puns all the time.
We were MSTKing it, more or less.
I can't with whole heart give it a 1 for that.
Well, of course, same thing. I mean, I wrote down 0, like, early on to answer this question. Yeah, if I'm mentally making ridiculous out of context jokes about the movie, then I'm probably not that immersed in it. Like, it's, again, something you said, and we also touched on earlier, while I was engaged with it, it was because the reason I was engaged is because I was so interested in seeing the ridiculousness about to happen that almost nothing would have been immersive enough for me to give it a 1. You know what I mean? Nothing they could have done in this movie would have made me give it a 1. Like, I'll be very fucking surprised if I would ever answered 1 to this question for this movie. So, while, you know, may not per se be the fault of the movie on face value, narratively, it deserves a 0 and is getting 1 from both of us.
Scott, on to you. Would you recommend and did you enjoy this movie?
Well, those are 2 scenes now we're getting to. I would not recommend it. Skip this movie. By our own scale that we set up earlier in earlier Bon Mots, if someone said, should I see it? And my answer is, or if you want to be amused, bizarrely, but you could definitely spend 2 hours watching way better movies, many, many, many of them. Did I enjoy it? Yeah, for a while I was watching it, because again, I was MSTKing it. You know, I was like, you're like doing that filtered through religion almost. Like, we're MSTKing religion, a religious mindset. Is that the best thing to do? Probably not. But it was amusing, but doesn't make me want to watch it again ever, or say it's worth a watch to anybody.
So you're giving it a 0?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm actually going to give this a 1. I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. Surprisingly so.
Sure.
I've seen movies that were supposed to be bad that did less for me than this movie did. And perhaps I was in the right mindset for it. Perhaps I was not in the right mindset to that I could appreciate this. But I feel that I wouldn't recommend this movie to the super religious. I might recommend this to people who are atheistic, who are looking for, like, are having hanging out with some friends, having a couple of drinks. You know, you want to find something to laugh at, something you can mock. Like, again, it's not one of those movies that's so bad it's a pain to sit through.
Yes.
You can actually sit through this and have
It's
a good time.
It's compelling enough.
And for
what
that,
it is.
That's my recommendation with that caveat.
I get it. Yeah, sure. It'll be a soft 0 for me, I guess, but I still can't quite recommend it.
It's not a must-see movie. It's a soft 1. But if you're bored one night and want to check out a film that'll make you laugh, and you can poke fun, it's a great movie for that. I would love to have seen the MST3K
If they ever
of this movie.
Fair enough.
So, I guess we're at it done. We're at a finish now. And about time because the rapture is about to begin. It could happen any time, as they want to say at the end.
No man knoweth the hour.
Scott and I both gave it the same score, oddly enough. We both gave it 7s, which again goes right to our point of view. It's fun,
somewhat better than mediocre.
Yes. Yeah. It could have been much worse. So I think you have to, when you're looking at this, we went in with no expectations whatsoever, and we came out pleasantly surprised. And I think that for a rapture movie,
that's well said.
To two atheists, that's about as good as
it's going to get. That's true.
So, you heard our views. Well, we won't see you again because we'll be up in heaven. Enjoy the post-apocalyptic Earth. I'm Jonathan E. Manser with Scott Lola.
Hey, where'd Jesus go?
And we'll see you next time.
Good night. This has been MOTS. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time. Music by Chris Morgan. Editing and engineering by Stephen Hermosa. This has been a Lost Signals production. All rights reserved.